Welcome to the Word for 2021. Today we're in Genesis chapter 11 and we're talking about the Tower of Babel. What was the mindset of those that built the tower? He tells us in verse 4. It says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth.'" They decided that they wanted to stay right there. They said, let's stay right here so that we're not scattered all over the earth. Well, this is in direct disregard for what God told them to do in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, to be fruitful, increase, and fill the earth. Instead, they wanted to stay in one place. They wanted to segregate and form a utopia all on their own. This is very similar to what took place in Acts chapter 1. Jesus told the disciples right before he ascended that they were to be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the very ends of the earth. But what did the church do? Well, they stayed there in Jerusalem. They became comfortable. The church was growing. They didn't have any desire to leave. And so what did God then do? He allowed persecution to come upon the church. And with the stoning of Stephen, the church was pushed out. And it says in Acts chapter 8, verse 4, those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. And where did they go? To Judea, to Samaria, and to the other parts of the known world at the time. Persecution was used by God to light a fire under the church and get them moving. The people there that were creating the city of Babel and that tower, out of a mindset and a view of life that was self-centered, they made the decision to build their own utopia. Their goal was security and preservation. That same idea for security and preservation, we see it today in the church. People think, wouldn't it be great to isolate ourselves from the world and only associate with those that believe like us, only those in the church, and be involved in the life of the church only? Well, the focus there, again, is self-centered and it's not according to God's purpose. Rick Warren, in his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, begins with these words, "It's not about you." That's exactly right. Our life is not about us anymore. It's what God wants to do. And for the church is to be a place of worship and then a training center so that we might be equipped to go out into all the world and preach the gospel, to make disciples. Well, the second thing that the people there in Babel were believing was they said, let us build ourselves a city. Their motive was, again, self-centered, and they wanted to fulfill their plans. They had in mind what they wanted as opposed to what God wanted. Well, God has a much bigger plan and a bigger picture for our lives. So we need to submit to him and not to what we think only. Then the people there in Babel said, let us build a tower. Now, the word Babel is actually two words put together. Bab is gate and El is God. So they were wanting to build a gateway to the gods, small g. They wanted to reach up into the heavens. They were wanting to build a place of worship, a center of worship. And astrology has its roots back to here. Well, what they wanted to do was decide who they were going to worship and how they were going to worship. They wanted to focus upon their own desires and worship what they wanted. And then finally, they said, let us make a name for ourselves. People banded together with the goal of making their name great rather than acknowledging God's name. If we seek to glorify God, we cannot at the same time elevate our name. I was listening to Francis Chan do an interview, and he was asked why he left the mega church that he founded in California. And in that rare moment, he said, to be honest with you, I was hearing my name more than I was Jesus. People seem to be following Francis and what Francis said more than seeking after Jesus. And so he said, I had to leave. The question is this, do we want people to see Jesus or us? There's a phrase in the church that we hear, hide me behind the cross. Well, what does that mean? It means that we want people to see Jesus and not us. After all, Jesus is the only one that can redeem us. Jesus is the only one that can heal us or change us, forgive us, or transform us. Jesus rose from the dead. So if we're going to listen or follow anyone, we need to listen to him and we need to follow Jesus. And finally, God came down and he looked at what was taking place and he made the decision to confuse their language, to separate them. Here, confusion was actually an act of mercy. When God allows men to have the godless desires of their hearts, it's never the utopia that Satan promises. It always leads to chaos and tragedy. There is not one example of a godless society where the people have not been turned on by those in charge. People say, we want to be united under their vision. But the problem is the strong always oppress the weak. Godless societies always crumble into a violent attempt to maintain control and power. If God turns us over to our own desires without any restraint, our desires will always oppress us and eventually destroy us. But if we pursue Jesus, he can satisfy our soul. He's the only one that can give us meaning and purpose and freedom. Here in America, we say we are one nation under God. Our founding fathers knew and believed that if we're truly going to have unity, it's only going to come as we follow God's commands, as we follow his vision, and as we obey his word. Thank you for joining the Word for 2021.